podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Dunbar End podcast here on the Hibs Observer's YouTube channel with myself, Jack Harris, joined as ever by Hibs Observer editor Patrick McPartlin. You might not have seen yet, but we've been advertising a little competition on our social media channels. I think what they get is hospitality tickets. Is it 2 hospitality tickets?
Yes, pair of hospitality tickets.
To Hibs v Motherwell, that what will hopefully be a decisive game right at the end of the season, the final home game of the season. All you have to do is subscribe to the Hibs Observer, get a year of the best Hibs journalism on the market, £12 for 12 months, and you'll be entered directly into that raffle. Yeah. All existing subscribers in as well?
All existing subscribers can also enter, yes. There is a link on the website.
It'll be somewhere. It'll be down here. It'll be on our social media channels as well. So do get involved with that. Now, in terms of things to talk about today, I don't think we want to talk too much about Derby disappointment, but there were some silver linings, if that's appropriate to say on such a disappointing afternoon.
Yeah, it's you don't ever think there's any positives to take out of a derby, and I think calling them silver linings makes it clear that it's not a positive as such, because it was a derby defeat. It was the manner of the defeat was also particularly grim to take for Hibs fans. But I think you look at the performances of Jordan Smith, who came on for his first competitive game since September the 13th. And Kanayo Megwa, who also hasn't played much really since the arrival of Felix Pashlack. I thought both, I mean, the 9 players who did remain on the pitch after Pashlack sending off all, performed well in difficult circumstances. But I think for Smith and Megwa, probably worth highlighting their contribution on the basis that if the two of them, we're assuming that Smith will start against Celtic on Sunday, Megwa also presumably under the chance of starting. And I think if they perform well against Celtic, then I think the respective spots are probably theirs to keep until the end of the campaign. I don't see David Gray as somebody who just make changes for the sake of it. And I think he tends to be quite, I suppose, loyal to players who've come in and who've done a good job for him, who've performed well, who've quite clearly sort of taken on board what he's been saying and sort of contributed to either good results or at least good performances. So I think it's probably worth covering their roles. It's not ever something you want to talk about in the wake of a derby defeat, is this player did well, that player did well. But I think in the circumstances, a little bit different from a sort of normal defeat. And I think the two of them can probably be pretty proud of the way they played in what was a challenging environment. Yeah, and I think it's interesting thinking about those two players, because you mentioned Smith not playing since September. Obviously, Megwa, I think, it was just before that derby. What was his last game? Did he play in the Dundee United 3-2? Might have come on as a sub for Pashlack. I think he might have done. But in the start of February anyway. Their circumstances are slightly different in that when Rafael Salinger signed to the club, Smith still gets a sort of run of games, and then Salinger comes into the team and holds down the spot. Well, I mean, this kind of backs up what I was saying about Gray just not making changes for the sake of it. Yeah. I think if you sign somebody like Jamie McGrath, then quite clearly he's been signed to start games, to have an impact on games with his set piece delivery, his eye for goal, that sort of thing. I think with goalkeepers, it's a different situation. And Salinger obviously arrived with a good reputation from his time in Austria, arrives with hopes of getting into the national team. He's 6'5", I think he is. And looking at his data, you'd say, well, you can see why Hibs were so keen to bring him in, especially last season. Quite well documented problems with, certainly the first half of the season with Joseph Bursic. It didn't really work out for him. Mm-hmm. Jordan Smith comes in and ends up holding the gloves for the rest of the season and actually performing quite well. So there was for me, I think no real reason to kind of bomb Smith out of there. You're just saying, the gloves are yours to lose the gloves are yours to keep until there's a reason for you to lose them. And I think there were some moments perhaps in the European games, and I think potentially in the league games where, goalkeepers go through kind of downturns in form, and I think that's what it was. But the way things were going for Hibs, I think David Gray probably felt he had to make a change. And Salinger came in for that League Cup game against Rangers at Ibrox and just held his spot since. And you could maybe say it's harsh on Smith, but you've also got, I think what we saw from him on Sunday is that he's been pushing Salinger for the past however many months. It's that sort of behind the scenes impact as much as anything. It's that sort of unique role of a kind of backup goalkeeper. And it must have been strange for Smith in a way, because he's gone from being, I mean, he is the perennial backup keeper. When he came to Hibs, it was very much, you looked at how much football he played, how much first team football he played in his career. And he's 31 now, I think. And you're looking at how many games he's played and you thought, well, where's the rest of them? And it's purely because he has had that role as sort of second choice, third choice, very limited sort of first team chances. So when he gets that run last season, and you think, you know what, he's actually doing pretty good. He's a, no pun intended, safe pair of hands. He's contributing well. The distribution was good. And
he's a really big part of that 17-game unbeaten run.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just the type of character as well. I mean, he's an affable character. He's got that kind of not sort of like Jack the Lad approach, but he's quite kind of, when you think about how kind of guarded and kind of one-dimensional footballers can be these days in press conferences, particularly, he's not like that at all. There's a lot of personality there, and obviously goalkeepers need that. But it's weird for him to have gone from being the sort of first pick, and for so long last season, it was not really up for debate, I think. And then, he's obviously gone back this season to being that number 2. And, I think there almost will have been this sort of humorous acceptance of it, this sort of, oh, well, here we go again, back to where I started from. And he now has a chance to come back in and sort of remind Hibs fans of what he can do. Because he did pull off some very good saves. He pulled off a very good one on Sunday from, I think it was Michael Steinbender. Just a really swift diving save down to his left. And I mean, he's almost a bit of a cult hero in a sense. You think about, wearing the bucket hat of Partizan Belgrade, that diving header to clear the ball and things like that. And how, can't talk about Jordan Smith without mentioning his mum, Carol. So he does have that. There is that sort of, that strange sort of aura about him, I guess you call it.
I still get the buzz any time I sort of see Carol Smith liked one of my tweets. I feel a wee bit
she
famous.
Likes all of her tweets, mate. I mean, it's just... But I think, it is sort of such an important role, that backup keeper role. And I think seeing the way that Smith played on Sunday, and I don't think you could really fault him for either goal. I mean, one of them's an own goal. The other one takes a deflection. He nearly gets to the deflection as well. I mean, you've got to give him credit for that. That he's really quick on his feet to get down. And I think it's like nearly fingerprints, nearly fingertips on Spittle's effort. Yeah. So it comes off rocky, I think. Yeah. And it's, when you're not playing for so long, like you're a backup keeper, you have to sort of keep yourself sharp, because you never know when you're going to be called upon. I mean, you don't expect it to be after a quarter of an hour in an Edinburgh derby, but you do have to be ready to come on when called upon. You need to be sort of on the ball. You need to be alert. And in some ways, it's potentially the hardest sub position, because you can't just sit back and think, well, there's no chance I'm getting on, because how often do keepers go off injured? How often do they get sent off and I have to come on? You'd have to be sort of just primed for involvement at any time. So the mental aspect of it as well, I think, and just the fact that when you see the way he was playing, and I think, the fitness as well. Obviously, he's not playing competitively. He might have been getting, the odd sort of few minutes in bounce games, but just to keep himself ticking over and to be doing well in training, it takes a lot. And I think, not putting aside the fact that it was a derby defeat, I think, that was one of the very few kind of, we'll call it a bright spot, if that's not going overboard, I think, was just his performance. And I think that, any fans who would have been maybe a little bit uncertain about, his abilities when he had that sort of little downturn in form, will probably be looking at it now and thinking, you know what, if he's got the gloves until the end of the season, that's all right with me.
Yeah. I think, especially in the context of what he comes into, and the goalkeeper's just been sent off, holding a 1-0 lead, there's a free kick to deal with straight away that I think goes wide anyway. But throughout the game, as much as it is the saves that he makes, it's his distribution, like you say, it's his composure. Just
taking high balls as well. He took a lot, and you think he's not the biggest, he's not the tallest keeper, and yet he's still coming out. He's getting a lot of airtime. He's catching those balls in the air and just sort of taking some of that pressure off the defence, which is so vital when you're in that situation with 10 men and then 9 men.
Yeah, it's any time the ball goes out, and it's not. I don't think it's time wasting at all. But you just see he doesn't rush to do anything. He just gives time, especially when Hibs go down to 9. They need that breathing space to actually reset and sort of let things a bit. I still remember, I was going to say, sort of in terms of humorous stories, I remember going to one of the games. I think it was maybe at Dundee. It wasn't at Dunfermline, I don't think, but there was one of them, and I think somebody had squirreled one of the balls up the jumper when like Salinger was doing his keeping. I remember Smith sort of climbing into the stands and having a sort of jocular argument with this guy trying to get the ball back. So he seems like a fun guy and a good character. And the other bright spot, I wanted to talk to you right back at the start. Just thinking about thinking about Kanayo Megwa, obviously was playing really quite well when Felix Passlack signed, and Passlack then comes sort of straight into the team. I guess it's sort of different to, well, maybe it's just how Gray wants to play. He wants those two wing backs. He sort of wants Cadden and Passlack, and maybe doesn't want to play that sort of more defensive. You've said that Kanayo Megwa was the most defensive minded right back at the club at the minute.
Yeah, it's the biggest issue for Kanayo is the fact that Hibs play with wing backs and not full backs. If they were playing with full backs, I think he'd be 90 minutes every week. As a defensive fullback, we saw elements of this on Sunday because Hibs were called upon to be more defensive, certainly with 10 and then 9 men when I think he came on at 1-1. And I think when you look at what he's capable of doing, he's really good in one-on-one situations. He reads the games really well. There were quite a few times where he was called upon just like, interceptions or just get a foot in difficult situations, the balls in the penalty box or, a mistake gives Hearts a kind of one-on-one chance. And, his timing is impeccable every single time. And I think, he's been hampered a little bit by Gray playing 3-5-2 because he's not suited to that wing back position. And I watched him when he first came through at Hibs when he was playing sort of week in, week out for the under-18s in the academy. He was playing as a centre back in a back three, but he's not got the height that you would want from a centre back. And that's another issue where it's like, two of his best positions, he's not suited for one because Hibs don't play that way, and he's not suited for the other one because he doesn't have that sort of height sort of requirement, if you like. And he's not going to get ahead of the likes of Ahora, Rocky, Grant Hanley, Jack Iredale, whatever. But I think he's never sort of let Gray or the team down when he's come on, when he started games. Think about the last derby, Easter Road, prior to this weekend.
Played really well against Kizaridis, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, and did again likewise. And I think there's always been this sort of question mark hanging over him about, is he going to get a chance at Hibs? Does he, should he move on? Do Hibs sort of change the way they play to accommodate his strengths? It's, you would never just change information for one player. That's crazy, but if Gray is to be more flexible, if there's more chance of him going to a back four, for example, in some games, then Megwa for me is the obvious one to play there because he's got that defensive nous is just so good, and he's just sort of honed it since he's been at the club, and just doesn't seem to be phased by the big occasion, as well, which I think is quite crucial. So I think. With Smith, we're saying there's a very good chance that if he plays well on Sunday, he keeps the gloves until the end of the season. With Megwa, it's a little bit more difficult because I don't think you play him as a wing back because you're not going to get the same out of him as you get out of a Pashlack. You're not going to get the same out of him on the left if you play a Beta or Nicky Cadden. You're going to get those sort of runs up the line. You're going to get the crosses in. We've seen Megwa put in some great crosses from wing back. In fact, probably the best one he put in was when he was playing left wing back against Midtjylland at the start of the season. It was a really fantastic curling cross to the back post, which didn't come to anything. But crosses like that, we've seen wing backs at Hibs repeatedly not do a good job of putting crosses in. And I think it's it's not something you want to task him with if it's not a strength. But if he can, it's maybe something he needs to look at adding to his game. Is just that kind of working on getting forward, working on the attacking sort of output from his all round game, because defensively really good, defensively really solid. I think you can see that, big team player as well. Just, comes in, does what he has to do, doesn't ask any questions, problem solved, if you like. It's just, you're playing a back four, you're sorted. But because Hibs aren't doing that, then he's just sort of almost stuck in this wee kind of limbo kind of situation at the moment. So, I think it'd be interesting to see what Hibs do with that. I know there's maybe been a couple of times he's played in defensive midfield, which is maybe exploring whether he can play a different position, whether he's better suited to a different position. But I just think, as a fullback, really, really good. As a wing back, room for improvement. So that's, if you're looking to be getting into that team, obviously Pashlack has the attacking output, doesn't necessarily have the defensive output. Do you try and somehow shoehorn Pashlack and Megwa into the same team? Do you change formation? What do you do?
Well, somebody was asking me about this, was like, how do you get Passlack, Megwa and Ahora and all of those sort of right-sided defenders? Passlack sort of less defensive, but
4-2-3-1.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I came up with. But my question to you would be, let's just take the Celtic game for one example. Obviously, it's likely that Megwa will be the person that David Gray calls to, perhaps Chris Cadden as well, sort of fitting on the bench for the derby. But do you change formation, or do you stick with Kanayo as a wing back just for that game, or do you maybe look to play a back four just to try and get the best out of him, especially with Celtic at the minute, because they are finding goals quite regularly. I mean, we saw, was it the Scottish Cup semi-final? They kind of find those 4 goals in extra time. Like they're finding that goal scoring knack again. Is it? Do Hibs try and play a more defensive game at Easter Road?
Yeah, well, they've got to get past Jordan Smith first.
Yeah, true. Well, diving headers, and maybe put the bucket hat on. He can do it sort of Lev Yashin style.
Yeah, you don't see goalkeepers wearing baseball caps anymore. Just that's the topic for another time.
And you haven't seen a goalkeeper win the Ballon d'Or since wore a flat cap. So, is there a correlation there?
May well be. I think with Celtic, David Gray tends to play more defensive against Celtic. Celtic Park, certainly. I think we've seen it's more of a back 5 rather than a kind of back 3 that could become a back 5. At home, it might be a different story. I think we've seen Hibs play Celtic at home before, and it has almost been like a back 4 at times, depending on who's playing for Celtic, how Hibs have set up. So, I wouldn't completely rule out something like that happening, but at the same time, I think, this is a team that have been playing with a back 3 for virtually the whole of the season, bar small sort of sections in some games where they've moved to a back 4 to accommodate either, sendings off, injuries, or just to try and get back into the game. So I think, you look at who's available, you look at who's likely to play. I think it's more likely that he'll stick with the back 5, and Meg will be seen as more of a kind of defensive wing back rather than an attacking wing back.
And then sort of push Cadden further up the pitch.
Where are you playing Cadden if you're playing Megwa? Or do you mean Nicky Cadden?
Nicky Cadden, sorry. Cadden.
Cadden. This is we need to specify, otherwise it gets confusing.
No, absolutely. So you sort of play him more in an attacking sense, I guess, when you're in possession, and then sort of back 4.
You see Hibs warming up before games defensively. They're always warming up on a 4, and it doesn't involve. 9 times out of 10 it's Nicky Cadden, but it doesn't involve the left wing back, because Hibs are just sort of kind of so.
Oh, that's true. Actually, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, and because there is that, I think bringing in Paslak was almost to kind of facilitate being able to attack down both sides, so there wasn't this over reliance on the left. We've talked about this to death. I'm not going to go through it again, but I think it's that if you are reverting to a back 4, you don't need Nicky Cadden in there, because his strengths lie in sort of like further up the field, putting those crosses in and stuff like that. And then so if you are reverting to a back 4 against Celtic with Megwa in there, then you're sorted, because he's playing right fullback, which is right back, even right fullback in better position. Right back, which is arguably where he's at his best. So it's kind of one problem solved, if you like, for Gray. But then it does also mean what do you do for kind of attacking output on the right, or do you just do what you've done before, just funnel everything down the left?
But you've just reminded me. I think it was when we were at maybe it was Dundee, or maybe it was when I was at Aberdeen, and they had the back 4. You just reminded me, sort of doing the headers, and it sort of goes. I think it was Jack Iredale does the header, and then you get a horror, and you get Rocky, and you just get sort of wee past that. And him standing next to the 3 of them, sort of doing the headers was.
Well, we joke, but that's the other thing about Paslak in a defensive sense, is that he doesn't have the sort of the height that modern football managers want in their defense. If you look at the likes of Rocky, you look at O'Hora, you look at Iredale, tall guys, good aerially for the most part, and Paslak is. He's better suited to playing further up the pitch. He's not suited to sort of that defensive thing, because other teams are just shelling balls over his head and trying to get in behind. So. It's, I don't want to say like his sending off could be a blessing in disguise, because no sending off ever is, but
definitely not. It's certainly not that one.
No, and it's just that kind of you're kind of almost not having him available means you're kind of sacrificing that attacking output on the right to be more sort of solid in a defensive sense. So it's it's maybe a mixed blessing, if you like. But I think it'll be interesting. We've not really seen Gray take many risks. We've not seen him change things up drastically at any point. So I'd be very surprised if he does do that this weekend. But you know what? It's the split. Anything can happen, as we've seen. Saw 2 red cards last Sunday. We've seen We've seen Motherwell come from 2-0 down. Motherwell be 2-0 up and then get paid back to 2-2 when at Ibrox. So I wouldn't like to make any predictions about what may or may not happen.
No, especially not at this point.
No, of course not.
Especially
no,
not.
I'm not daft.
Not
in that sense.
We won't be predicting our unlikely goal scorers for Celtic then, because that didn't age particularly well. Martin Boyle was quite a likely goal scorer in an Edinburgh derby. So neither of us were correct there. You were quite good with your sort of general predictions. I think you predicted the lineup perfectly, which I was very impressed by. Made my job a lot easier doing the graphic. I just trust in the...
Yeah. I would have preferred to have predicted the result correctly. I think that would have been a better...
That would have been good.
I'd happily have got all the other ones wrong.
You have to have something to aim towards. I guess sort of pivoting on before we sort of continue talking about predictions and patting each other's on the back, or more me patting you on the back. Not any pats yet. Where is this going? Let's think about... I wanted to ask you, is there a sense that sort of Celtic game becomes you almost have to throw caution to the wind a bit and try and get a result, with Motherwell now having the gap to 6 points? Obviously only 3 games to go beyond this one. I mean, every game, and you would be the first to tell me this is a must-win game, but
David Gray would be, actually.
David Gray would be, you would be...
Second or third.
He's rubbing off. He's rubbing off on us. But does it have that sense, do you think? Do you want... Because I know we've talked about the sort of difference between do they defend, do they attack? Is there a sense that...
Well, it depends if you think that Hibs should go all out to win this game, whether they should put out a weakened side to lose the game, which we've seen sort of quite a lot of.
I'm fed up of this. I'm so fed up of this. No, all right.
I think from Hibs' point of view, you can't be gung ho about it. You certainly can't be too gung ho too soon. Because,
not gung ho.
But no, I'm not suggesting you've said that, but I just think there needs to be a fine balance. I think there needs to be, if Hibs are thinking they've got a chance of winning this game, they've been, not just competitive against Celtic this season. They have actually, drawn with them at Parkhead. They've beaten them at Parkhead. They were close to them the last time at Easter Road, which ended in a 2-1 defeat. So, as seasons go against Celtic, they've got a pretty good record. You wouldn't necessarily discount Hibs at home against Celtic. They've got a pretty good record against them in the league over the past, it could be something like 10, 12 years, maybe even longer. So it's certainly not one of those where, just sort of stick a bank of 4 and a bank of 5 and hope for the best. I think, there are there's a fragility in that Celtic side. And it's obviously they had a good result of the weekend. They'll sort of have the bit between their teeth. They'll, the title race obviously is a different kind of focus for them. But I think Hibs have to look at just trying to haul in Motherwell, trying to do everything they can. Again, something that Gray would say is you can only focus on ourselves. You can only focus on trying to catch the team in front. That's what it has to be about. So I think you go and you try to win the game, but you also try not to let anything silly happen, because two games in a row would be a bit much for that, a bit more nonsense. I think
3 games in a row.
It's a fair point.
3 games in a row.
So I think
can't go on like this, can it?
It can.
I do. Thank you.
I do think that Hibs basically have to win all the remaining games, don't they? And just hope that Motherwell drop points somewhere.
Well, if they win all their remaining games, Motherwell will drop.
But in advance, But in advance of that, and you wouldn't like to bet against that. But again, it goes back to anything can happen in this sort of crazy Scottish Premiership season. But no, I think Hibs absolutely have to be kind of positive going into Sunday's game. And I know there's suspensions, there's injuries, there's doubts over whether certain players will play, and we'll get an update tomorrow, in fact, from David Gray about how the other players have come through Sunday's game and how they're looking. But it does become, the magnitude of the game does get bigger because of what happened on Sunday, and it was big enough to begin with. So it's, unless you're one of those people who thinks that Hibs should go all out to lose and lose by a big margin as well to help Celtic.
Stop commenting this on my Twitter posts. I'm not going to agree with it. I can't. I think about, it's the David Gray sort of school of, you have to concentrate on yourselves. You have to get your own job done. You never know. Well, you've said this today. We've said it throughout most of the season. You just never know what's going to happen in this season. Nobody's going to give anybody any favors. You can't expect that, and
not intentionally, anyway.
Not intentionally, no. But it's about sort of focusing on yourselves and just trying to get these results, because, like you say, anything can happen, and it's not unfathomable to think that in 4 games Motherwell will drop points.
But it's
at
also
least once. I mean,
it's also just been
will.
it's been such a kind of meh season for Hibs over the piece. Like,
I wanted to put on record. I loved the line that you used about the sort of it's a hungover Sunday in sort of yesterday's jeans.
It's just felt like a meandering season, and that's, there's obviously been some good results. Beat Hearts at Easter Road, beat Celtic at Parkhead. Good results, good performances, but in the grand scheme of things, it's been a bit like, well, what about the rest of it? And ever since like the European games, and even that sort of ends in glorious failure. But even after that, it's been a bit plodding. It's not been helped by Motherwell having the season they're having, or Hearts doing what Hearts are doing. But it just it feels like they're, in the sense of Sunday, like there needs to be a few more moments where, Hibs fans can say, you know what, that was actually really enjoyable. Because I'm not sure there's been too many of that this season. There certainly hasn't been enough compared to last season.
Yeah.
When you consider, Hibs going to Ibrox and winning for the first time in, I think it was 6 years, I think it was. And then you had the victory at Tynecastle. You had, victory at Easter Road over Hearts. You had, some really good performances. We beat Celtic, and that sort of 3 games in a week where they beat Celtic, Dundee United and Hearts, stuff like that. There hasn't been any of that this season. And I mean, I'm not going to give any, do we call this airtime? We'll call it airtime. I'm not going to give any airtime to some of the, quite frankly, wild comments I saw in the aftermath of the derby. I think we can just sort of say, you know what, it's post-derby, we'll give you this.
We all made wild comments. You had to spend 5 minutes calming me down before we went.
It felt like much longer, to be fair. But it just feels like that sort of season where it is kind of fizzling out. The performance in the cup competitions has been not as good as Hibs would have hoped for. It's been really kind of a bit of a damp squib on both counts. And in terms of the league, it's been not a million miles away from where they were last year. But as we keep saying, the performance of other sides has kind of pushed that feeling down. So it does feel very kind of meandering. It does feel a bit sort of, can the season just end, please? I think for a lot of fans, and I completely get that. I do, and I think
you almost sort of see other teams showing you what's possible, I guess.
And,
there's no reason. I think I've said this before, I probably have, but there's no reason to say that Hibs couldn't be one of those teams doing that, and that does then influence. Like what is statistically quite a good record, but it just doesn't feel that way at all.
Yeah.
You think
it also doesn't matter if you don't get the 3 points, and we all know this. It's a results business. It's if you play well but don't win, then very few people are going to care about that. So I think from that point of view, it could be in the operative word. It's in italics there. Could end up being a better season than it looks at the moment, but a heck of a lot needs to fall into place for that to happen. And I just think based on what we've seen so far over the previous sort of 34 games is that now, then you maybe wouldn't be too confident that it would happen. But again, it just goes back to you can't really have predicted anything about this season. So maybe there is still hope. This is the optimist in me coming out.
It's a cry for help. Maybe there's still hope.
It is a cry for help. If people look at how I'm blinking, I'm actually blinking sort of, save me in Morse code. But no, I think it needs to be a strong ending to the season regardless. There needs to be, something for fans to kind of hold on to instead of just this, well, the season's fizzled out in the first game of the kind of post-split fixtures. There's still, 4 big games to go, 4 games that, it's not unthinkable that Hibs could win all of them. It won't happen, but it could.
Never say never.
And, there needs to be sort of more fans to cheer about, I think. So, yeah, Sunday's game is big in that sense. It's a chance for the side to almost kind of put last weekend behind them, just to kind of bounce back a little bit. A bit of freshening up in the team with Sandra not playing and Megwa potentially coming in, and just see what that looks like. But it is a huge game. I mean, yes, they all are huge games, but I think even more so because of what happened last weekend. It's just there needs to be a good performance. There needs to be a good result, and you kind of fear for how things could turn if it doesn't end up like that. Just for the reasons we've been talking about, that fans maybe feel there's been a missed opportunity this season, and there probably has. There probably has been.
And it needs a wee lift, doesn't it? It needs a wee sort of lift in spirits, and
it's feeling a wee bit in the doldrums at the moment, and it needs something to kind of lift out of that.
Which is fair enough, because I mean it's been tricky, and I mean it's been tricky for us as we'll understand that, as fans will understand that too. But you do just need that sort of little spark, something to cheer about, like you're saying. And fingers crossed that's the case. On Sunday we'll have lots of content to bring you from the Celtic game, from the press conferences tomorrow, and probably some analysis in between as well. Do head over to the Hibs Observer website, app, social media as well to get a link to that competition. Once again, it's £12 for 12 months of Hibernian FC journalism from Patrick, Craig and I, and a lot to read, a lot to see, a lot to listen to as well, and obviously the opportunity to win those 2 hospitality tickets for that Motherwell game at the end of the split. So do get involved, and I would say we'll keep our fingers crossed for you. That's a lot of fingers we have to cross for hopefully a lot of people.
Well, hopefully the Motherwell game isn't a sort of dead rubber, as they say.
No. It's gonna be of dramatic importance. You really should click the link, and £12 for 12 months is, I think we both agree. I mean, we sort of would say it, but is a great deal for what is sort of daily Hibs content.
£1 a month, yeah.
£1 a month, 25p a week. Decent, very good. Very good.
And supporting us most of all, which is ultimately the I
didn't want to say that. But
well, that's true. It's true.
You are supporting us. You can decide whether or not you think that's a good thing, worth your time. Just trying to think of things that cost £12. What costs £12 these days?
Subscription to the Hibs Observer, which is all that matters.
Oh, yeah, but sort of a whatever you would spend £12 on this month, instead spend it on the Hibs Observer quality journalism. Oh, I love this. Right, we'll leave it there. We will see you very soon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Now at McDonald's, a McDouble is $2.50, so you can get your gym gains on, or just get lunch for only $2.50. Get more value on the under $3 menu.
Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher for delivery.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.